With relief negotiations, confirmation hearings, and an impeachment trial, keeping Congress busy in D.C. Today we're hearing from Indiana Senators Todd Young and Mike Braun for the first time since the insurrection on the Capitol, plus Congressman Andre Carson and former Indianapolis Mayor Greg Ballard. It's all ahead this Sunday in Focus.
Exploring the issues that matter most in Indiana. This is In Focus with Dan Spieler.
More doses of the coronavirus vaccine are headed to Indiana in the coming days, with some encouraging numbers in recent weeks when it comes to the spread of COVID-19 in our state. Meantime, there's a lot happening in the nation's capital when it comes to the pandemic and several other big issues, with an impeachment trial looming just weeks after the violent uprising on Capitol Hill, and more executive orders from the new president, with talks ongoing about another relief bill. We spoke about it all with Indiana Senator Todd Young.
Can we truly come together as a nation right now after everything that's happened?
You know, I think we can, and I certainly believe in and hope we can, or I wouldn't have made the statements I made in a column and the other public statements that I've made. I'm working with my colleagues in a bipartisan fashion, 16 of us, 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats, to try and come up with a bipartisan COVID relief package. As you indicated, I introduced Mr. Buttigieg to be the transportation secretary before the committee. So I'm looking for opportunities to work with this administration. It is going to take some effort, some follow through from President Biden. And it's really going to be important in the next couple of weeks to see whether or not this $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package that he put before Congress without consultation with Republicans or Democrats is something that he's willing to pull back from so that we can really work together to the benefit of the nation.
January 6th, do you have any regrets over the way all of this was handled by Republicans leading up to that day? Is it even bigger than that in terms of the way we approach political controversies in this era of outrage and sometimes outright misinformation?
Well, I think we need to name and shame members of the media who are out there perpetuating, mistruths and deceiving individuals. I think the same thing applies to politicians who are out there perpetuating things that are completely false and deceiving their constituents. I think we, of course, need to emphasize the importance of making sure that there's no violence associated with our political views. We resolve our disputes peacefully in this country. We don't march in the streets of Indianapolis and bash in windows or loot stores, and we certainly don't descend on the cathedral of democracy here and ransack the place. So everyone should be held to account, and we need to come together, though. We need to heal, and I am glad that President Biden set that tone throughout his campaign. I'm glad he set that tone during his inaugural address. Now he needs follow through, and where a hand is extended and where a reasonable proposal is given, I'm prepared to work with him on behalf of all Hoosiers, just as I worked with President Trump.
You mentioned accountability. You voted this week against a move to table discussion of whether the impeachment is constitutional. At this point, are you firmly against the idea of convicting the former president, or are you open to that possibility?
Well, look, I'd be remiss if I didn't listen to a lot of the evidence, but I think the views of most Hoosiers, a view I share, is, and there's even some Democrats in the U.S. Senate that share this view, is we have a new president, and Donald Trump is now a private citizen. There are avenues to hold accountable private citizens, like our federal court. So in the meantime, we should be spending the vast majority of our time emerging from this pandemic, restoring our economy, and doing things that actually benefit the American people and their daily lives. So we really need to move on from this as quickly as possible.
Would you support a move to censure the former president instead?
I don't even think that that's going to get enough traction. So I haven't seen the resolution, but I think everyone just really wants to move on.
Generally speaking, when it comes to your party and its policies, as well as the overall tone and an approach. Where do you want to see the GOP go from here in the post-Trump era? Because it seems like there is already a split forming in terms of whether to go all in on the former president's approach or forge something of a different path forward.
I'll say this. You cannot keep a party together. You cannot congeal a majority party based on anger and resentment. Instead, it takes empathy and actual resolution of challenges that people are facing.
All right, we have more of that interview on our website. Just click on In Focus. On the other side of the aisle, I also spoke this week with Indiana Congressman Andre Carson.
Well, I'm very pleased by the bold actions of the new administration. And I have to say, I'm also extremely happy and relieved to once again have a president who really wants to help people, not just himself. I think President Biden had practically no help from the Trump administration during the transition period. But I think despite this, the new administration has hit the ground running, addressing urgent priorities and keeping its promises to Americans. But I'm excited about his COVID relief plan. I think with the Biden-Harris administration, the new Senate Democratic majority and our Democratic House, they're driving to effectively crush COVID-19 and deliver a very desperately needed economic relief.
The goal of 100 million doses in 100 days. It's been slow going, but we're starting to trend toward that number. Is the president's goal ambitious enough?
You know, I think America will achieve its goal of vaccinating 100 million Americans in the president's first 100 days, or if not just over the 100-day mark. I think in order to do that, we're going to have to ramp up our efforts to get the vaccines where they are most needed and encourage Americans to take the vaccine.
Some of your colleagues across the aisle have called the impeachment effort too divisive in a time where the president has called for unity. Some have even gone on the record to say it's unconstitutional. What's your response to all of that?
Well, you know, President Trump, he effectively incited a very violent insurrection against our democracy. People died, including police officers. It could have been much worse. He stoked up a violent mob to attack the Capitol and basically stop Congress from fulfilling our constitutional duty to count the electoral ballots that have duly elected our president and vice president. And, you know, I think the mob violently attacked law enforcement and smashed its way into the Capitol. I think that act alone, even calling for the hanging of the vice president and hunting down the speaker and members of Congress, including myself, I think that those are chargeable offenses. And, you know, Donald Trump refused to stop this violent mob after pledging to march with them. You know, no one is above the law, and Donald Trump must be tried and convicted by the Senate to ensure that no future president ever thinks that he or she can do the same thing and get away with it.
Congressman Andre Carson, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
What an honor. Thank you.
And I'm joined now by Senator Mike Braun. Senator Braun, thanks so much for being with us. This is the first time we've had a chance to speak since the events of January 6th. You are among those opposed to the impeachment trial. You were also among those who'd been planning to vote against certifying the results until the violence broke out that day. You then said you'd vote to certify to get this ugly day behind us. Do you have any regrets, though, over the way all of this was handled by Republicans leading up to that day, with the way the election results were questioned, perhaps leading to some of the anger in that riot that unfolded?
You know, Dan, my intention all along never was on record of saying overturning the results or decertifying. It was just acknowledging that in what a crazy year that we had with COVID, and the more I investigated it, in many of these places, election commissions and local jurisdictions actually changed the rules, and it was done legally. It may not have been done constitutionally. And my interest was, and I wrestled with George Stephanopoulos in early December. You might have seen Rand Paul do it this past Sunday. Kind of that same point that if it's gotten to where you can't even question something, or you have words put in your mouth like you're trying to overturn something. That was never my intention. That's a state responsibility anyway. And what happened on that day, obviously, was something that no one would have intended to occur. It was a tragic day in the sense of what did occur. And of course, after that happened, I thought it was pointless to go forward with trying to make that point. So it's more complicated than what it appears to be on the surface. And I think as part of this country, if you are castigated, demonized for an opinion that might be different from others, at least have a chance to air it out and make sure you get it straight. So
your predecessor, Senator Joe Donnelly, had this to say about the situation, though. Here's what he had to say. He said, quote, "You were part of the team that helped create this entire event." He said Senator Braun, quote, "put his loyalty to Donald Trump ahead of his obligation to the people of Indiana and the Constitution." What's your response to that?
You know, I'd say that's actually a mild statement coming from the other side of the aisle. I hearken back to when I ran for office, and that started about the day after I won the primary, and how vitriolic, how much the campaign, at least that they waged against me, and the other side does it as well, vice versa, was based upon lies and distortions. And in this case, like I said earlier, if you want to try to broadly blame everyone for something, especially when that was not my intent in the first place, I don't think you can excuse what did occur, what was fomented, what was encouraged by pushing the envelope on the part of the president. Obviously, he'll have to get that reconciled. He's not in the office anymore. And I don't think that helped him in terms of whatever he was trying to accomplish. So what Joe said there is what most Democrats have said about anyone that wants to disagree with anything that they might have a point of view on.
You've said the president pushed the envelope. You don't stand in favor of convicting him. Would you support a move to censure the president instead?
You know, I don't think you get two bites at the apple, and Chuck Schumer definitely wants to have a trial. And I think what occurred here just the other day with that vote, which was kind of a technical vote, but that point of order, pretty well laid out where most Republicans are coming from, and many of us are disappointed. Someone like me that comes from the outside, never had a lot of similarity with that kind of bravado, carry that Hoosier humility, and a lot of those values we all appreciate at home wasn't necessarily reflected in the way things were litigated out of the White House. There was still an agenda that worked for most Hoosiers. That's still in place. And post all the drama that we've had with impeachment, with COVID, we're going to have that stark reality of what lies ahead in terms of policy. And a lot of that people are getting a little bit of a measure of currently with canceling out the Keystone XL pipeline. Some of the executive orders that the other side said you should never use have been used more than probably any other president out of the gate. We're going to get back quickly, I think, to that dynamic, which should be on the merits of the case, the issues themselves. Most outspoken Republican on getting engaged on climate. We made a lot of headway there. We can't be a party that just says no to everything. And a lot of that gets lost in what occurred through a most unusual year.
All right, Senator Braun also told me he'd likely be voting for transportation nominee Pete Buttigieg next week, but likely would not be voting to confirm the president's HHS nominee. You can see more of that interview on our website. Coming up, we'll talk with our panel about some of this week's headlines in D.C. and at the State House, including a bill that could limit what local health departments are allowed to do. Stick around. We're back right after this.